Historical linguistics can be seen as one of the earliest antecedents of modern linguistics. Historical linguists are concerned with language development and change. It has direct relevance to comparative linguistics, where linguistic relatedness is one of the major concerns. William Jones's proposal in the 18th century that Sanskrit and Indo-European languages might have a common ancestor as they share common linguistic features served as the official inauguration of historical linguistics work. This was accelerated by the general tenet of the century, the evolutionary studies. German linguist Franz Bopp made the opening move by establishing the genetic relatedness of these languages, Sanskrit and Indo-European, using the correspondence between verbal systems of these languages. Not much later, Jacob Grimm studied the sound correspondence between the consonants of Germanic and other Indo-European languages, thus proposing the Grimm's law.
Yes, Jacob Grimm proposed the Grimm's law. In the 19th century, under the influence of evolutionary biology, August Schleicher introduced tree modeling of the genetically related languages. During the 1970s, a group of young linguists, most of them being the students of Schleicher, came up with the argument that sound change can be explained with sound laws. They came to be known as neo-grammarians. Burness' law of 1975 is a celebrated proof for the neo-grammarian hypothesis. Schmidt proposed an alternative wave model in the year 1972, which claimed that linguistic innovations spread like waves. Thus, the boundaries between the proto-languages are constantly shifting. Now, synchronic versus diachronic approaches. Tell me about.
Well, the synchronic versus diachronic approaches, linguistics has made an important distinction between the study of language from a diachronic perspective and the study of language from a synchronic perspective. Synchronic linguistics deals with study of language at a given point of time, while diachronic linguistics studies the linguistic development over a period of time. The word diachronic means throughout time. Dia means throughout and chron means time, while synchronic means at the same time. Syn means same and chron is time. The historical processes that affect the language in its development and the tracing of a language back to its ancestors, etc., constitute some of the major concerns of diachronic linguistics. Synchronic linguists considered language as a working system at a given point of time, and so the evolutionary history of language is of least importance in synchronic studies. Historical linguistics is also called diachronic linguistics. Now, tell me about the use of written records for the historical studies.
Well, written records were always given undisputable importance in historical linguistic studies. The historical investigation of older written texts can contribute in several ways. For example, by documenting sound changes, distinguishing inherited sounds from borrowed sounds, stating changes and borrowings, and helping to understand the developments and changes in the writing systems and orthographic conventions. Language is prone to constant shifts and changes. These changes are documented in the written documents, and their availability makes subgrouping, classification of languages, identification of the causes of changes, the reconstruction of the proto-language, and the analysis of borrowed changes cushy, that is easy. Interestingly, it is fallacious to assert that languages can only be reconstructed with written documents.
Yeah, that's true. Leonard Bloomfield in 1925 argued that proto-language can be reconstructed successfully even in the absence of written records from the earlier stages of the language. This was rooted on the neo-grammarian hypothesis that sound change is regular. This reoriented the focus of linguistics research from written records to spoken language and their dialects. Now, talking about language classification. Three important ways of language classification in linguistics are typological classification, areal classification, and genetic or genealogical classification. Typological classification considers universal similarities, whereas genetic classification assorts languages on the basis of their genetic relatedness. Two languages are said to be genetically related if they share a common ancestor.
Typological classification considers universal similarities, whereas genetic classification assorts languages on the basis of their genetic relatedness. Two languages are said to be genetically related if they share a common ancestor. On the basis of the features that they have inherited from their ancestors, languages are classified into different language families. There are about 250 language families in the world. The notion of subgroup or branches is important in historical linguistics. Subgrouping refers to the internal classification of languages within a language family. It gives clues as to which sister languages are most closely related to each other. A subgroup is all the daughters that are the descendants of a common ancestor that itself has at least one sister. The only generally accepted criterion for subgrouping is shared innovation.
Shared innovation is defined as a linguistic change which shows a departure from some trait of the proto-language, and this particular change is then shared by a subgroup of the daughter languages. Notion of language family. Language family is a group of genetically related languages. Languages that share a kinship by virtue of having developed from a common ancestor are considered as genetically related languages. The common ancestor is referred to as proto-language. The proto-language had split into 2 or 3 dialects which in course of time became too different that they were no longer mutually intelligible. This continued for many a number of years, thus giving rise to large language families. In the meantime, most of their ancestors might have become extinct. The concept of tree was borrowed from other disciplines where they used trees for representing genetically related entities. Languages are laid in each nodes of the tree depending on the genealogical relation they hold.
There are around 250 language families in the world. However, this is a rounded figure. One of the oldest and widely studied language families is the Indo-European language family. Major branches of Indo-European language family are Tocharian, Indo-Aryan, Anatolian, Armenian, Greek, Albanian, Balto-Slavic, Germanic, Italic, and Celtic. Indian languages are part of the Indo-Iranian language family. Historical linguists have adopted comparative method to reconstruct the proto-languages by a comparison of the descendant languages. The work of reconstruction usually begins with phonology with an attempt to reconstruct the sound system. Then again, the classification of language family is not undisputable. There exists a group who favor merging of many languages into few, and a rival group who prefer several separate families unless they have strong evidence.
Some basic concepts in historical linguistics now. So proto-language. Proto-language is the once a spoken ancestral language from which daughter languages descend, or it is the language reconstructed by comparative method which represents the ancestral language from which the compared languages descend. Sister language. Languages which are related to another by virtue of having descended from a common ancestor are the sisters. Cognate. Cognate is a word or a morpheme which is related to a word or morpheme in a sister language as they have inherited and descended from a common single word of the proto-language. Cognate set. A set of words or morphemes which are related to one another across the sister languages because they are inherited and descended from a common single word of the proto-language. Comparative method. A method which compares forms from the related languages, that is cognates, in order to reconstruct the proto-form in the ancestral languages for comparative method.
Sound correspondence. It is a set of cognate sounds, that is the sounds found in the related words and cognate sets, which correspond from one related language to the next because they descend from a common ancestral sound. Reflex. The descendant of a sound of the proto-language in a daughter language is said to be a reflex of that original sound, or conversely, the original sound of the proto-language is reflected by the sound which descends from it in a daughter language. Language isolates. Language isolates are languages with no known relatives, that is, a family with a single member. Language isolates may have had relatives in the past which have disappeared without coming to be known. Etymology lists 75 language isolates. Some of the important ones are Ainu, Kiviri, Burushasi, Kiliak, Nihali, Zuni, and Basque.
Now, typological classification. Typological classification attempts to classify languages by their types rather than their relationships. The typological classification was proposed by August von Schlegel in 1880, set a standard for further typological studies. He classified languages basically into three, that is, isolating or analytic languages, the first. The second is synthetic or inflectional languages, and the third is agglutinative languages. Now, isolating languages or analytic languages. Languages that have only one element of basic meaning per word are called language isolates. They show a low morpheme per word ratio. They do not tend to combine with morphemes except for compound words. Languages that are isolating or analytic are Mandarin Chinese, Vietnamese, Cambodian, Cantonese, etc.
Now, inflectional or synthetic languages. So, inflectional or synthetic languages that have several meaningful elements per word but are in some way fused are called fusion or inflectional languages. Fusional, inflectional, or synthetic languages. In inflecting languages, the adjacent morphemes tend to cause changes to one another and is difficult to assign each category to an identifiable morphemic section. Examples of such languages are Greek, Latin, Russian, English, and Sanskrit. Now, agglutinative languages. The languages that have more than one element of basic meaning per word, but unlike the inflectional languages, they keep apart these morphemes from one another and undergo no modification. Now tell me more about agglutinative.
So they keep apart these morphemes from one another and undergo no modification. Thus, they have morphologically complex words in which individual grammatical categories can be easily assigned to morphemes that are glued together to form the word. This term was introduced by Wilhelm von Humboldt in 1836, and it means to glue together. Examples of agglutinative languages are Finnish, Swahili, Turkish, Tamil, Japanese, and Dravidian languages. Another classification includes polysynthetic or incorporative languages to the list. Polysynthetic or incorporating languages are those that permit the formation of extremely long and complex words which are functionally equivalent to the whole sentence. An important property of such languages is that their verbs contain elements that indicate the person, number, and gender of both subject and the object.
Yes, and the subject and the object can be left out entirely. Examples of such languages, that is incorporative or polysynthetic languages, are Mohawk, Eskimo. There's a word in Eskimo I remember, Kaluna Sungutu Tuit, which means, do you speak English? Now, basic word order typology. So word order typology classifies languages on the basis of the order in which words, specifically subject, verb, and object, are arranged in a sentence. There are 6 logical possibilities of combination: SOV, SVO, VSO, VOS, OSV, and OVS. The most common order is SVO followed by SOV and VSO. Languages in which object precedes the subject, as in OSV.
So the most common order is SVO, you're right, followed by SOV and VSO. Languages in which the object precedes the subject, as in OSV and OVS and VSO, are very few in number. So examples of the SVO word order languages: English, Vietnamese, and Khasi. Examples of SOV basic word order language are Japanese, Korean, Indian languages except Khasi. VSO languages: Welsh, Hawaiian. VOS languages, they are less than 10%, Malagasy, Tzotzil. OSV languages, Amazonian languages. OVS languages, Hicks-Cariana, and a few Amazonian languages. Now tell me about language change and reconstruction.
So language change and reconstruction. So sound change. Sound change receive primary concern in historical linguistics. There are several dimensions along which sound changes can be categorized. Sound change can be defined as a phonological process that is accepted by all the speakers in a linguistic community. The categories: the first is regular versus sporadic. Sporadic sound changes affect only a few words and do not apply generally throughout the language, whereas regular changes take place uniformly wherever the phonetic circumstance potential enough to trigger a change is encountered. Historical linguistics works on the assumption that sound changes are regular. The second type is unconditioned and conditioned changes. Tell me about it.
So the unconditioned and conditioned changes. Sound changes that occur irrespective of the context in which they occur are said to be unconditioned changes. Conditioned sound changes take place only in certain specific contexts and works depending on the neighboring sounds. The third type is phonemic versus non-phonemic sound changes. So phonemic changes affect the phonemic inventory of a language either by deletion or addition of phonemes. Non-phonemic changes do not alter the total number of phonemes in the language. Phonemic changes are of two types, that is merger and split. Merger, these sound changes in which two distinct sounds merge into one. Mergers are irreversible, and once two sounds have completely merged, the subsequent change will not be able to restore the original distinction. Now tell me about the split.
So split follows merger. In split, the existing sound which undergoes the split will give rise to a new sound retaining the older sound. Shifts in which one sound changes to another without deletion or addition of phonemes in the phonemic inventory is an instance of non-phonemic change. Now, neo-grammarian theory of sound changes. The last quarter of the 19th century saw the rise of the young linguistry in Germany with a revolutionary proposal that sound changes are regular. Karl Brugmann, Hermann Osthoff, Hermann Paul, August Lesky, and Karl Werner were among the most prominent proponents of this hypothesis. Their essential claim was that the sound changes are systematic. They held the certain positions. Now tell me about the positions that the neo-grammarians held.
The positions that they held were: the first, that sound changes are exceptionless; second, that sound changes are conditioned only by lexical and phonetic factors; the third, that the sound changes are phonetically gradual and lexically abrupt. Osthoff and Brugmann have been accredited for the claim that sound laws are exceptionless. They claimed this in the year 1878. It altered the then existed approach of language reconstruction. Hans Heinrich Hock states the neo-grammarian hypothesis as change in pronunciation which is not conditioned by non-phonetic factors is regular and operates without exceptions at a particular time and in a particular community with possible environmental restrictions. Now, Grimm's law. So Grimm's law, or the first Germanic sound shift, talks about the relationship between German obstruent sounds and obstruents in Indo-European. Tell me about it.
Yes, it talks about the relationship between the German obstruent sounds and obstruents in the Indo-European languages. Jacob Grimm in the year 1822 pointed out the number of changes in the ancestor of the Germanic languages and tried to explain why many Germanic words differed so systematically from their Indo-European cognates. These changes distinguished Germanic languages from other Indo-European languages. Prior to Jacob Grimm in 1818, Rasmus Christian Rask proposed this correspondence, but it was Grimm who formulated it into a general law. Grimm's law demonstrates the sound changes as follows. So Proto-Indo-European voiceless stops changed to voiceless fricatives in the Proto-Germanic languages. For example, pa, which is a voiceless stop, changed to fa, which is a voiceless fricative. PS became Proto-Indo-European.
Correct. The Proto-Indo-European piesk became Old English fish. Now, Proto-Indo-European tha became tha. the dental fricative, voiceless dental fricative. The changed to the, as in tres becomes three. Proto-Indo-European ka becomes ha, as in curd becomes herd. The Proto-Indo-European voiced stops changed to voiceless stops like ba becomes ba, abel becomes apple, dwo becomes do, genu becomes ni, as in ka and double e. Proto-Indo-European voiced aspirated stop becomes voiceless fricative like brat becomes brother, do becomes the.
Alright, now triangular representation of Grimm's law. The pataka at the top, and then to the right hand side, bottom right hand side becomes pa becomes fataha, pataka becomes fataha, and below the fataha you have bhadagha. Bhadagha changes to badagha, and moving leftwards, right? So on the bottom left corner you have badaga. So and badaga changes to pataka. So at the top goes to the top, the arrow goes to the top. So that's the triangular representation of the Grimm's law. Now talking about Fortunatus' law, which was given in the year 1881. In Sanskrit, law plus dental disappears and dental changes to lingual, that is cerebral or retroflex. Pre-Sanskrit palta becomes patta.
Yeah, right. The law plus dental, according to the Fortunatus law here disappears. The dental changes to lingual, that is cerebral and retroflex. So palta in the pre-Sanskrit became patta, Sanskrit, that is closed. So that was the Fortunatus law. Now talking about the Warner's law. So Karl Warner in 1875 described a historical shift in the Proto-Germanic languages whereby voiceless fricatives like fa, sa, ha, sa underwent voicing when they were immediately preceded by an unstressed syllable in the same word. Thus they became ba, da, ga and za respectively. This was proposed as a refinement of the Grimm's law. According to Grimm's law, Proto-Indo-European voiceless stops fa, ta, ka should have changed to Proto-Germanic fa, tha, ha.
Yes, they should have changed to fa, tha, ha. But in a large number of words in which these Proto-Indo-European voiceless fricatives have shifted to voiced plosives, that is ba, da, ga. This anomaly was rectified by Warner's law, which suggested that in words where the Proto-Indo-European voiceless fricatives have changed to Proto-Germanic voiced plosives, the voiceless fricatives were preceded by an unstressed syllable of the same word. For example, Proto-Indo-European pater, that is Phater, pater has changed to Proto-Germanic father. Instead of the expected word father, which is with a dental, voiceless dental fricative, it did not change to father, which is voiceless dental fricative.
So in father, the voiceless fricative the is preceded by an unstressed syllable and hence it underwent voicing becoming the, father, the. Now talking about the Grassmann's law. Grassmann's law proposed by Hermann Grassmann in 1863 states that in Proto-Greek and Sanskrit if an aspirated consonant was followed by another aspirated consonant in the next syllable, then the first sound would have lost its aspiration. It is a case of pure dissimulation. Sanskrit bhabhuva became babhuva, which means became. So types of sound changes: assimilation, dissimulation, syncope, apocope, apheresis, epenthesis, metathesis, and haplology. Tell me about it. Haplology.
So haplology are the changes in which A repeated sequence of sounds is simplified to a single occurrence. That is haplology. For example, the Old English humbly became humbly. Breaking. So breaking refers to the diphthongization of a short vowel in particular contexts, like for example, the Norwegian Karl, which means old, became CL in Old English. Now rhoticism. Rhoticism represents changes in which saw becomes ra, usually between vowels or glits. For example, onosis, which is a nominative singular in Latin, became onosis, which is a genitive singular, which became honoris, which means honor.
So, yeah, correct. Onosis, which is a genitive singular, comes from onos, which at the end became honoris, which means honor in Latin. Now, intervocalic voicing. Intervocalic voicing means the voicing of sounds occurring between vowels and glits, like va, ya. So, lupu in Latin became lobo in Spanish, which means wolf. Now, nasal assimilation. Nasal assimilation is the process in which nasals change to agree with the following stop, like Mumbai. In Mumbai, ba is a bilabial nasal, and the nasal before it, preceding it, is ma. And why so? Because it agrees with the following, or the word that comes next, the stop word that comes next to it.
Yeah, correct. Now diphthongization. Diphthongization refers to any changes in which an original single vowel changes into a sequence of two vowel segments, which together occupy the nucleus of a single syllable. For example, the Old English word miss becomes mouse, which means chura. Now monophthongization. In monophthongization, a former diphthong changes to a single vowel. Now vowel rising. Changes in which no vowels change to mid vowels or mode vowels move up to high vowels are referred to as vowel rising. For example, Finnish A becomes E in the word final position. Coalescence or fusion. Coalescence refers to the process in which two adjacent segments are replaced by a single one.
Yeah, correct. Two adjacent segments are replaced by a single one which shares the features of the two original ones. For example, in Korean, when a stop and ha occurs together, they are replaced by an aspirated stop. Internal and external reconstruction now. So language reconstruction is carried out in two ways, internal and external reconstruction. Internal reconstruction involves comparing forms within a single language to get at an earlier stage of the language. It works on the principle that the irregularities that we encounter in a language are the end result of the sound changes. It is not the case that they have been there in the language from the very beginning. Internal reconstruction is almost the same as morphemic analysis. However, internal reconstruction focuses on irregularities while the morphemic analysis brushes the irregularities aside.
Yes, and external reconstruction or comparative method. So it compares forms from related languages, that is cognates, which have descended from a common ancestral language. This method aims to recover all the possible facts about the evolution of the language and thereby to trace back these historical developments so as to recreate the proto-language. In addition, external reconstruction method considers the changes that have taken place in various languages developed from a common ancestor. The work of reconstruction begins with phonology. There are some set principles that govern the reconstruction, namely naturalness, directionality, frequency, Occam's razor, and economy. The principle of naturalness insists that if two competing analyses are equally acceptable, then the more natural one among them should be our priority or preference.
The principle of frequency says that If everything else is equal, our choice should be one particular sound in the correspondence set which shows up in the greater number of daughter languages. Some sound changes always follow a particular order and thus our choice should go with it. This is the principle of directionality. Occam's razor advocates the simplest possible analysis, everything else being equal. The principle of economy says that the analysis which requires the fewest independent changes is the one most likely to be right. Wave model now. So, not every scholar was in concord with the neo-grammarian regularity hypothesis. Dialectologists believed that every word has its own history, and thus they dismissed the neo-grammarian hypothesis as well as the tree model. John Schmidt brought in an alternative proposal, the wave model, in 1972.
The wave theory dealt with changes brought about by contact among languages and dialects. Schmidt's model considered language changes as waves generated in a pond when a stone is thrown into it. Language changes spread outward from a center point concentrically and become weaker as the distance from the center increases like a wave. The lack of sharp boundaries between neighboring languages is attributed to this wave-like spread of language changes, as all the changes may not cover the same area. One wave or sound change may intersect other outward moving waves which emanate from another center. Changes due to language contact are similar to this. This model takes into account the dialect-style continuum and the facts that languages do not split from their mother.
That's correct. They do not. This model takes into account the dialect continuum and the fact that languages do not split from their mother just like that, but then it is always a gradual process. Now, talking about relative chronology. So, sound changes have got a time tag attached to them. It pertains to a particular period of time in the history of a particular language. When two or more changes act upon the same form, it is important to order the sound changes according to the time at which they have taken place in order to do a fitting reconstruction. Relative chronology is the temporal order in which the sound changes have taken place. Now, tell me about analogy and its relation to sound change.
Well, talking about analogy and its relation to sound change, so analogy, borrowing, and sound change have been the three important types of linguistic changes for neo-grammarians. Analogy is a process whereby one form of a language becomes more similar to another that is somehow associated with it. This was written in Arnotto's work in the year 1972. Now, in analogical changes, a language may borrow its own patterns so as to change other patterns. Thus, it is also called internal borrowing. Analogical changes involve a relation of similarity. Analogical changes are determined by grammatical and morphological aspects.
One classic example of analogy is the change of the Old English sarig to sorry on analogy with sorrow. Analogy changes are classified into two, that is proportional and non-proportional analogy. Proportional analogy now. So changes that can be represented in an equation of the form A is to B equals C is to X. This comes under proportional analogy. For example, ride is to road as dive is to dove, where X is solved with dove. So dive is to X, where X is solved with dove. The past tense form of dive was dived, which then changed to dove under analogy with road. Analogical leveling and analogical extension are the two commonly identified proportional analogical changes.
Sound change is regular and causes irregularity, while analogy is irregular and causes regularity. This is called Sturwant's paradox and was proposed by Sturwant in 1917. Now about analogical leveling and extension. So analogical leveling. Here a more common pattern replaces a less common one. It reduces the number of allomorphs that a form has and it makes a paradigm more uniform. For example, strive, strove, stroven becomes strive, strived, strived. Analogical extension now. So here a less common pattern replaces a more common pattern. For example, arrive, arrived becomes arrive, arove, which is a non-standard variety.
Now a comparison between analogical changes and sound changes that are done in the following table. So phonology. Sound change is conditioned by phonology. Analogy is never affected by phonology. Another base is grammar. So sound change is not conditioned by grammar, whereas analogy depends on the grammatical feature. Next base is distribution. So sound change is regular and analogy is irregular. Next base is effect. So sound change is irregular and analogy is regular. The effect of sound change is irregular and that of analogy is regular. Now talking about productivity, sound change is productive and analogy is not productive. Now talking about the non-proportional analogy. Tell me, what is non-proportional analogy?
All the analogical changes that do not go with the equation of proportional analogy are treated as the instances of non-proportional analogy. Folk etymology, back formation, meta-analysis, blending, and hypercorrection can also be seen as analogical change. Folk etymology now. It is a process whereby people's mistaken notion about an association between linguistics forms results either in a shift or in the original form or in the formation of new words based on false association. For example, the English word hamburger originally means someone from the city of Hamburg. However, as people's imagination associated with ham, that is meat, new words like chicken burger and veg burger are formed.
Back formation, and then you have meta-analysis and meta-analysis or reanalysis. Meta-analysis involves a change in the structural analysis of a linguistic form on analogy with already existing forms. So for example, an orange becomes an orange. Blending, hypercorrection. People's attempt of people to change the form of a word in a lesser prestigious variety to make it conform to how it would be in a more prestigious variety. This sometimes results in overshooting the target and end up in the formation of an erroneous outcome. That's hypercorrection. Now, Tadbhav and Tatsam, tell me about those terms.
So Tadbhav denotes words which had been borrowed from Sanskrit but which had changed to fit the phonology of the recipient language. That's Tadbhav. And Tatsam is a term applied to borrowed words which retained their Sanskrit form. And you're correct about hypercorrection, that some sound changes because they need to conform to a higher prestigious variety. Here sounds in the borrowed words with those sounds which seems to them more foreign than the sounds which the word in the donor language actually has. So that's hypercorrection. Now talking about Pidgin and Creole. So Pidgin is a contact language developed by speakers of mutually unintelligible language who are brought together by economic and social regions. Pidgin is a new variety created.
That's right, Pidgin is a new variety created out of the two or more existing ones by restriction and simplification. It is also called trade language as the as the driving force to communicate with other community is often trade. Pigeons are developed in accordance with the needs of the people who use it, and it is always as simple to learn as possible, though vocabulary of the pigeon based generally on the dominant language, it maintains a balance between the dominant and the subordinate languages. Pidgin is not invariably a trade language. There are instances like that of Tokpisin where it has been developed for administrative purposes. Pidgin is never a lower variety of any language on which it is based, but a language in itself with a community of speakers. However, Pidgin do not have any native speakers like other languages.
Talking about Creole now. So Creole is a pidgin that has acquired native speakers. That is, Creole is the language spoken by children of pidgin speakers. It is a second generation pidgin. Creoles are just ordinary language except in their origin. They arise through the process of creolization and they are prone to lose their identity gradually by decreolization. Decreolization happens when Creole is spoken in a country where other people speak the Creole's lexical source language. Since the latter is prestigious than the Creole speakers tend to shift towards it, producing a range of intermediate varieties. Baselect is the term that sociolinguists use to denote Creole, and the prestige variety on which the Creole is based is called the acrolect.
The intermediate varieties formed in the process of decreolization are called mesolects. Post-Creole continuum represents this range of varieties spanning the gap between the baselect and the acrolect. Dialect, now idiolect. Idiolect are the individual variants of a language. Isogloss, transition area and relic area. Now morphosyntactic reconstruction and semantic change. So talking about this, we have the first thing, which is syncretism. Syncretism, as the name suggests, refers to the fusion of distinct morphological forms of a word. In syncretism, distinct morphological forms become identical in their form. This simply means that syncretism refers to the instances in which two or more morphosyntactic functions are collapsed within a single inflected word form.
For example, you represents both second person singular and plural pronouns. That's also a portmanteau morpheme. Grammaticalization and lexicalization. So grammaticalization and lexicalization are two different pathways of linguistic change. The first, known as grammaticalization, is the process whereby lexical elements turn into grammatical or less grammatical items become more grammatical. A case of this is the modern English auxiliary will, grammaticalized out of the Old English content word willen, which means to want. Lexicalization describes a process whereby relatively independent lexical items are combined to form a new lexical entry. For example, bread and butter. Tell me about semantic change now.
So semantic change deals with the change in the meaning or concept associated with a word. Semantic changes are classified as follows. The first is expansion, contraction. Expansion or widening or generalization or extension or broadening are semantic changes in which the range of meanings of a word is extended. For instance, the English word dog had a more specific meaning of a powerful breed of dog, which is then generalized to include all the breeds of dogs. Contraction or narrowing or specialization or restriction are those semantic changes in which the range of meanings is narrowed down so that a word can only be used in a few contexts appropriately. The classic example of this is the English word hound. It originally meant dog in general, but it is now specified as a species of dog used for hunting.
Now, contraction, narrowing, or specialization, restriction are those semantic changes in which range of meanings is narrowed down so that a word can only be used in a few contexts appropriately. The classic example is of the English word hound. It generally meant dog in general, but it is now specified to a species of dog used for hunting in specific. Now, talking about the other type of classification, amelioration and pejoration, semantic changes which induces a shift in the sense of a word to a more positive one, more positive value than before, is termed as amelioration. English word Jude was a word of ridicule earlier. Pejoration now. Pejoration is just the reverse of amelioration. Pejoration signals the semantic changes that involve a shift of sense of a word to a lesser positive one. The word knave in modern English is derived from Old English knafa, which meant youth.
Metonymy. Metonymy is commonly defined as a change in the meaning of a word so that it comes to include additional senses which were not originally present but which are closely associated with the word's original meaning. In many English-speaking locations, tea, in addition to a drink, means evening meal. Now, synecdoche. Synecdoche is a kind of metonymy involving a part-to-whole relationship where a term with a more comprehensive meaning is used to refer to a less comprehensive meaning or vice versa. Spanish word meaning boda, meaning wedding, has come from Latin vota, meaning marriage vows. Taboo replacement. Now, taboo replacements are the semantic changes involving euphemism, the replacement of words regarded as unpleasant with more acceptable words.
Yes, correct. The rooms where indoor toilets were installed was called water closet in Britain. This was replaced by toilet, originally a loan word from French toilette, which meant small cloth. Now, subreption. Subreption is a semantic change which causes the extension of the meaning of a traditional word or expression to new reference with similar functions. As a result of the addition of 2 months in the Roman calendar, the word September, which was derived from the Latin word septem, 7, is now used to refer to the 9th month. Now, social motivation of sound change. Let's talk about that. So, tell me about lexical diffusion under the social motivation of sound change.
Lexical diffusion. This concept of lexical diffusion was used primarily by William Wang in the year 1969, challenges the neo-grammarian regularity hypothesis that the sound laws apply mechanically to all the instances of the target sound. Neo-grammarians viewed sound changes as phonetically gradual and lexically abrupt. On the contrary, William Wang suggested that sound changes are lexically gradual and phonetically abrupt. The primal claim of lexical diffusion theory is that sound changes does not occur in all potential environments simultaneously. Rather, changes might affect some words before others, as some environments are more conducive to change than others.
Correct. Changes originate in a small subset of morphemes or words and then gradually diffuse to others and affect the whole vocabulary. Thus, the claim sound changes are lexically gradual and phonetically abrupt. In lexical diffusion theory, sound changes attain the status of being regular only when all the potential instances of change in the vocabulary have undergone the change. Until they do not undergo the change. Now, sociolinguistics study of Martha's Vineyard and New York study. Coming up, let's talk about language families of South Asia now. So about the Indo-Aryan languages. They occupy the largest area of the subcontinent. Tell me more about the Indo-Aryan languages.
They are spoken mainly in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka and the Maldives island by about 640 million people. Most of the area is seen as a dialect continuum, as there exists a factor of mutual intelligibility between these languages. Indo-Aryan or Indic languages constitute a branch of Indo-Iranian language, which itself is a branch of the Indo-European language family. It is surrounded by other language families like Dravidian in the south, Tibeto-Burman in the north and east, and Iranian in the west. This resulted in the mutual influence of these language families. The major languages that belong to Indo-Aryan language family are Hindi, Bangla, Punjabi, Marathi, Urdu, Odia, Sindhi, Asamiya, Sinhala, Nepalese, Dardic, Gujarati, Kashmiri, Konkani, Maithili, Magahi, Kangdi, Dogri, etc.
Dardic languages constitute Dardic languages constitute the non-contiguous Indo-Aryan languages spoken in the northwest of Lahdi and Kashmiri. Sheena, Bhaskarik, Maya, Torwali, Kalash, Pashait, Kawarbati, Shumasti, Grangali, Dameli, Sinharis, Maldivian, Saurashtri, Dakhini, Khowar and Paria are the most notable ones among them. Indo-Aryan languages with Hindi, Marathi, Nepali, Sanskrit, etc. are written in Devanagari script, a derivative of Brahmi script, whereas other derivatives of Brahmi is used to write Bangla, Asamiya, Odia, Sinhala, etc. Urdu, Sindhi and Kashmiri is written in Arabic script. Gurumukhi script is employed in writing Punjabi and Roman script in Konkani.
Indo-Aryan languages have 5 distinct positions in the articulation of the stop or plosive consonants: labials, dentals, retroflexes, palatals, and velar. Most languages of this family have retroflex consonants except Asamiya. Asamiya doesn't have retroflex consonants. Indo-Aryan languages are marked for having 5 nasal consonants: ma, na, ang, nya, and na. They possess an aspirated series of both voiced and voiceless stops. It is observed that Sinhalese does not show this trait as it lacks aspirated stops. Indo-Aryan languages are head-final languages with SOV word order. They are postpositional in nature as most other South Asian languages. In these languages, the subjects of the finite intransitive clauses typically receive nominative case, which is usually unmarked.
The case on the subject of a finite transitive clause in the Western Indo-Aryan languages depends upon aspect. In perfective aspect, the subject receives ergative case, and in the other cases it receives nominative case. Non-nominative subject is an areal feature of the South Asian languages. Indo-Aryan languages also display a wide range of dative subject constructions where the subject receives dative case. Most of the Indo-Aryan languages seems to be WH in situ languages. They display scrambling and fairly good number of compound verbs. Most of the Indo-Aryan languages except Gujarati, Marathi and Sinhalese have only the nominal form of the anaphor. Now talking about the Dravidian languages, so they are spoken by around 200 million people, inhabited mostly in southern Indian parts of eastern and central India. Krishnamurti.
That was mentioned in Krishnamurti in 2003. A small group of people who speaks the northern Dravidian language, Brahui, is inhabited in Pakistan also. Dravidian language family is the 5th largest family in terms of the number of speakers. It comprises at least 26 languages spoken primarily in South Asia. The term Dravidian was first employed by Robert Caldwell. The 4 main Dravidian languages are Telugu, Tamil, Malayalam and Kannada have independent script and literary history. Dravidian languages have stops, nasals, laterals, trills and approximate and semi-vowels. They also have retroflex sounds, which is a characteristic feature of the languages in the Indian subcontinent. Dravidian languages are agglutinative in nature. They are head-final or left-branching languages, meaning the relative order in which the subject...
Yes, they are head-final or left-branching languages, meaning the relative order in which the subject, object, and the verb occur in a declarative sentence is SOV. These languages do not employ prefixes or infixes. Instead, grammatical relationships are expressed only by suffixation or compounding. Adjectives in Dravidian languages precede the noun head they qualify, and the adpositions follow the nouns, thus postpositions. Similar to the other language families of Indian subcontinent, Dravidian language family has various constructions with dative subjects, compound verbs, reduplicated words, etc. Sandhi is a distinguishing feature of the Dravidian languages.
Finite verbs in these languages tend to carry the agreement markers with the subject NP in number person except for Malayalam. Dravidian languages follow nominative accusative pattern and not absolutive ergative pattern. Almost all Dravidian languages except Malayalam have both the nominal and verbal anaphors. They are also marked by the presence of both participle relative clauses and correlative clauses. Dravidian languages are divided into three basic groups: Northern, Central, and Southern. Northern Dravidian is divided into three basic groups. So one branch of Northern Dravidian constitutes of Kuduk and Malto, and the other branch of the Northern Dravidian constitutes of Brahui language.
Yes, the Central Dravidian language is again constituted of two parts. The first part has two languages, that is Parji and Kodaba, and the second branch of the Central Dravidian has three languages. The first has two, the second has three, that is Kolami, Naiki, and Olari. Now South Dravidian is subdivided into two parts: South Dravidian 1 and South Dravidian 2. The first, that is South Dravidian 1, is again divided into four parts, four subparts. The first has Tamil and Malayalam language, the second part has Kota and Toda language, and the third part has Kannada and Badga language, and the fourth part has only one language, that is Tulu. Now tell me about the second branch of South Dravidian.
So the second branch of South Dravidian is again subdivided into two parts, and those two parts are again subdivided into two parts each. So the first part has two parts, where the first part of the first part has again two languages, that is Telugu and Gondi, which are like one another. So they are subdivided into one group, and the other part of the first subdivision has Konda. Now talking about the second division of the South Dravidian is again divided into two parts. The first of the second has Kui and Kuvi. The second of the second division has again two languages, that is Bengo and Manda. So that's about the South Dravidian languages. Now tell me about Austroasiatic.
Well, the Austroasiatic language family is divided into three branches: Munda, Nicobarese, and Monkmer languages. It is estimated that there are approximately 90 million Austroasiatic speakers, of which over 70 million speak Vietnamese, 10 million speak Khmer, and about 5 million speak Santali. Munda is the western branch of the Austroasiatic language family, which represents an older set of population in South Asia. Munda speakers are found in the states of Odisha, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, West Bengal, Uttar Pradesh, Andhra Pradesh, and Maharashtra. Anderson classified Munda languages as follows. The first was Santali, a North Munda language. It is the largest Munda language. Now tell me more about this, Santali.
So yeah, correct. Santali, which is a North Munda language, is the largest Munda language. Munda languages are head-final languages with relative word order of SOV and hence postpositional languages. They are agglutinative languages similar to other postpositional languages. In these languages, the adjectives precede the noun. They are largely suffixing languages. Now, talking about the eastern branch of the Austroasiatic language family is Monkmer. Gerard Defloth classifies Monkmer languages into 12 branches: Khasi, Palaungic, Monic, Khmuic, Vietmuong, Katuic, Bahnarik, Piarik, Khmer, Jahaic, Semoic, and Semelaic. Khasi, the language spoken in Meghalaya, is the only Monkmer language that is included in the list of the 22 official languages of India.
Though Monkmer and Munda languages belong to the same language family, they exhibit a wide range of typological opposition. In Monkmer languages, the relative order of words is SVO, unlike other South Asian languages, including Munda languages. Thus, they are prepositional languages and the adjectives follow the noun. Monkmer languages are mostly fusional languages. In opposition to Munda languages, Monkmer languages are largely prefixing languages. Most Austroasiatic languages except Khasi have only verbal anaphors. Khasi has both verbal and nominal anaphors. Now, the next language family is Tibeto-Burman. Tell me about the Tibeto-Burman language family.
Well, about the Tibeto-Burman languages, they are spoken across a wide area in South Asia, including Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, northern India, northeast India, and Pakistan. Tibeto-Burman languages in South Asia are not extensively studied or documented, hence the classification of these languages is a Herculean task. Schaffer in 1994 divided Tibeto-Burman languages into 6 groups: Sinitic, Bodic, Burmic, Barik, Karen, and Daik. In another classification, aside from Chinese and Karen, Tibeto-Burman languages are divided into 7 primary divisions: Tibetan Kinauri, Kiranti, Abor Miri Dafla or Mirish, Kachin, Burmese, Bodogaro, and Kukinaga. Kukinaga includes languages like Meitei, Mru, Mizo, Hakka, Thado. LSI lumps many of these languages into a big group called Naga group.
Correct. LSI lumps many of these languages into a big group called Naga group, which comprises the languages Angami, Sema, Rengma, Kesme, Ao, Loto, Tengse, Tukuni, Yachumi, Mikir, Maram, and many others. Tibeto-Burman languages have stops, nasals, continuants, and semivowels. A number of Tibeto-Burman languages have a retroflex series of stops, affixes, fricatives. Most majority of words in Tibeto-Burman language family are monosyllabic and they possess lexical tone. These languages exhibit singular, dual, and plural distinction. All the languages that belong to this language family except Karen and Bai, which are SVO languages. So all of these languages are SOV, word order languages. Karen and Bai are SVO.
Most of the Tibeto-Burman languages have both nominal and verbal anaphors, but there are few languages which have only the nominal anaphors. Now, language isolates. An isolate is a language which has no known relatives. Thus, isolates constitute a language family with a single member. The major language isolates in South Asia are Burushaski and Nahali. Burushaski is spoken mainly in the Gilgit-Baltistan in Pakistan and Srinagar. It contains a large number of loan words from Urdu and Dardic languages. Yasin, Nagar, and Hunza are the 3 dialects of Burushaski. Nahali, which is spoken in West Central India, Madhya Pradesh, and Maharashtra.
Now, Proto-Munda is divided into 2 parts, North Munda and South Munda. North Munda is divided into 2 parts, Korku and Kewarian. Kewarian is again divided into 2 parts, Santhali and Mundari. Now coming back to South Munda is divided into 3 parts, Khadiya Yuang, Gutobre Mogta and Soragorum. The Khariya Yuang of the South Munda is divided into two parts again, that is Yuang and Khariya. After that, Gutobre Mogta, which is a subdivision of the South Munda, is divided into two parts again. The first part is called Remo, and the second part is called Gata. Remo is again subdivided into two parts. The first is called Gutob and the second is called Remo. After that, Gata of the Gutobre Mogta of South Munda is divided into two parts again, plain Gata and full Gata.
So the Gutobre Mogata of the South Munda is divided into two parts, Remo and Gata. Remo is again divided into two parts, Gutob and Remo. And the Gata of the Gutobre Mogata is again divided into two parts. The first is plain Gata and the second is full Gata. And the third subdivision of the South Munda is Sora Gorum, which is again divided into two parts. The first is called Sora and the second is called Sora Gorum. Gorum only. The first is Sora.